You might have heard a story about the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Maybe you heard that during World War II, a Nazi cannonball got stuck in it. It's a vivid picture, something that makes you stop and think. A beautiful old Italian tower, famous for its tilt, scarred by a piece of wartime iron from a German gun. It sounds like something out of a movie, a dramatic moment of conflict frozen in time. But here's the thing about that story. It's not true. It's a myth, a piece of wartime folklore that has somehow stuck around. The Leaning Tower of Pisa did not get a Nazi cannonball stuck in it. No such event is recorded, no physical evidence supports it. And while it might be a good story, the real history of the tower during World War II is just as interesting, and in some ways even more dramatic. It's a story of near misses, human decisions, and the remarkable survival of an iconic structure in the midst of global conflict. This isn't to say the tower was untouched by the war. Far from it. Pisa, the city where the tower stands, saw heavy fighting. It was bombed, it was occupied, it was a strategic point, and the tower itself, with its commanding views, definitely played a part in the grim calculations of war. But the idea of a Nazi cannonball lodged in its ancient stones is a tale that, for all its appeal, just doesn't hold up to the facts. Let's talk about what really happened, about the tower, the war, and how legends like this sometimes take root. The towers long stand a landmark through centuries. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is old. Really old. Work started on it in 1173. That's a long time before cars, before electricity, even before America was discovered. It was meant to be a bell tower, a grand structure next to the main cathedral in Pisa. But right from the start there was a problem. The ground underneath was soft. Pisa is built on marshy land, and the foundations weren't deep enough. So before they even finished the third floor, the tower started to lean. Imagine that. You're building something huge and important, and it's already tilting. It must have been frustrating for the builders. They tried to fix it as they went, adding more stone on one side to try and balance it out. But it kept leaning. The construction stopped and started many times over the centuries. Wars, money problems, all sorts of things got in the way. It took over 200 years to finish, finally wrapped up in the mid-1300s. And by then it had a very noticeable lean. This lean, which started as a flaw, became its most famous feature. People from all over the world come to see it. It's not just a tower, it's a symbol. It stood through so much history. It watched as Pisa grew and changed. It saw different rulers come and go. It survived earthquakes, floods, and the passage of time. For hundreds of years it just stood there, leaning, an architectural marvel and a beloved landmark. By the time the 20th century rolled around, the tower was already a global icon. Everyone knew about the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It had been photographed countless times, painted, written about. It was a tourist magnet. People would stand in front of it pretending to push it back straight for funny photos. It had become part of the fabric of human culture, a structure that defied gravity in a charming, slightly precarious way. But this very age and fame also made it vulnerable. It was old stone after all, and even with its lean, it was a solid, prominent structure. Its height and visibility meant it stood out. And as the world edged closer to another massive conflict, a war that would engulf continents and reshape nations, the tower's centuries of peaceful existence were about to be severely tested. It was a target, not necessarily for its cultural value, but for its sheer presence and commanding view. The calm, tourist-filled square around it would soon be very different. The lean, once just an engineering quirk, would now make it a distinctive landmark in a world at war, a marker for both friendly and enemy eyes. War clouds over Italy, a nation caught in conflict. The 20th century brought two world wars, and Italy, like many other nations, was deeply affected by both. The second one, World War II, was particularly brutal and long. For Italy, the war started in 1940 when its leader, Benito Mussolini, allied the country with Nazi Germany. This was a partnership rooted in shared fascist ideologies and ambitions. Italy joined the Axis powers, fighting against the Allies, which included countries like Britain, France, and later, the United States. At first, the war seemed to go well for the Axis. They had some early victories. But things started to turn. By 1943, the tide was definitely against Italy and Germany. The Allies launched an invasion of Sicily in July 1943, marking the beginning of a long, hard campaign to liberate Italy. This invasion was a huge turning point. It put the war directly on Italian soil. The fighting was fierce. The terrain in Italy is difficult, full of mountains and rivers, which made it easy for defensive positions to be held. The Germans, who had reinforced their presence in Italy, fought stubbornly. As the Allies pushed north from Sicily, up the Italian boot, every town, every bridge, every strategic point became a battleground. Cities were bombed, ancient sites were damaged, and the civilian population suffered terribly. Pisa, located in Tuscany, a region in central Italy, was right in the path of this advance. It wasn't just a beautiful old city, it was strategically important. The Arno River runs through Pisa, which meant bridges were vital. The city also had train lines and roads that were crucial for moving troops and supplies. For both the retreating German forces and the advancing Allied armies, control of Pisa was a significant objective. By the summer of 1944, the Allied forces, including American, British, Canadian, and other troops, were pushing hard through Tuscany. They had liberated Rome in June. The Germans were falling back, trying to establish strong defensive lines. One of these was the Gothic line, further north in the Apennine Mountains, but fierce fighting occurred well south of it, as the Germans tried to slow the Allied advance at every turn. Pisa became a frontline city. German forces occupied it, using its buildings and strategic locations for defense and observation. They knew the Allies were coming, they fortified positions, set up machine gun nests, and prepared for a tough fight. And in a city like Pisa with its tall, prominent structures, the Leaning Tower would naturally draw attention. It was the highest point around, offering incredible views of the surrounding countryside, the river, and the approaching Allied forces. It was an obvious choice for an observation post, a place from which German spotters could direct artillery fire or monitor enemy movements. This fact, the tower's strategic use, became a key element in its real wartime story, shaping its fate far more than any mythical cannonball. The Cannonball story fact, fiction, and how legends begin. So, let's talk about the main story the Nazi cannonball stuck in the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's a compelling image, isn't it? You can almost picture it, a jagged piece of metal, a relic of a desperate battle, lodged forever in the ancient stone, a permanent reminder of the war. But, as we've said, this particular story isn't true. There is no Nazi cannonball stuck in the Leaning Tower of Pisa. No historical records, no physical evidence, no photographs from the time or later show any such damage. Why does such a story exist then? How does a legend like this get started and spread? It's not uncommon for myths and rumors to grow around famous landmarks, especially during wartime. In times of conflict, information is often incomplete, stories get exaggerated, and dramatic events are sometimes imagined or misremembered. People hear snippets of information, combine them with their own fears or hopes, and a new narrative begins to take shape. Think about the conditions in Pisa in 1944. The city was a war zone, Allied forces were bombing it. German forces were entrenched, artillery shells were flying, buildings were being hit and damaged. It's very possible that some buildings in Pisa were hit by shells, maybe even by German shells during the chaotic fighting, or by Allied shells intended for German positions. It's not a stretch to imagine that a shell could have hit a building and remained partly lodged in it. Now, take that idea, combine it with the overwhelming presence of the Leaning Tower, and mix in the dramatic tension of a Nazi occupation, and you have the perfect recipe for a legend. Maybe someone saw a damaged building nearby and assumed the tower was hit too. Maybe someone heard about artillery fire and attributed a specific dramatic impact to the most famous structure in the city. Over time, the details might have shifted. A shell became a cannonball, a general impact became a specific Nazi impact, and a damaged nearby building became the iconic tower itself. It's also important to remember the psychological impact of war. People seek meaning in destruction. A cannonball stuck in the tower would have been a powerful symbol, either of the tower's resilience against enemy attack or of the Germans' barbarity. These kinds of stories, even if not true, can serve a purpose in shaping public opinion or in processing trauma. The truth, as far as historians can tell, is that the Leaning Tower of Pisa was incredibly lucky. While Pisa itself suffered greatly, the tower escaped direct, significant damage from artillery or bombs during World War II. It stood tall, battered by the winds of war around it, but its structure remained intact. This isn't to say it wasn't in danger, it was in very real danger, perhaps even more danger than if it had merely been hit by a stray cannonball. The real threat to the tower wasn't a random shot, but a deliberate decision that could have been made in the heat of battle. That story, the true story of its near destruction, is far more compelling than myth, and it brings us to the actual events that unfolded around its base. In the crosshairs, the tower's real peril and its rescuer, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, did not get a Nazi cannonball stuck in it. but it came incredibly close to being utterly destroyed during World War II. The real danger didn't come from a random shot, but from a calculated military decision that was almost made by the Allied forces. This is where the true dramatic story lies. By August 1944, Allied troops were pushing north through Italy. The city of Pisa became a key point in their advance. German forces were retreating, but they were not giving up without a fight. They used every available advantage to slow the Allied progress, and one of the biggest advantages they had in Pisa was the Leaning Tower itself. Imagine being a German soldier in Pisa at that time. You need to see where the enemy is coming from. You need to direct your own artillery fire. Where do you go? To the highest point, of course. The Leaning Tower of Pisa offered an unparalleled panoramic view of the Arno River, the surrounding plains, and the approaches to the city. From its upper levels, German spotters could easily observe Allied movements for miles around. It was a perfect observation post, a prime location for directing defensive operations. Allied intelligence knew this. They suspected the Germans were using the tower as an observation post. This presented a huge problem. An enemy observation post, especially one so effective, needed to be neutralized. In wartime, military targets are destroyed, and if Germans were using the tower to direct fire against Allied troops, then the tower itself became a legitimate military target. The order was given to an American Army sergeant named Leon Weckstein. He was a forward observer, part of a unit tasked with scouting enemy positions and calling in artillery strikes. His job was to confirm if German spotters were indeed in the tower. If he confirmed their presence, his instructions were clear call in artillery fire. And given the size and nature of World War II artillery, that would have meant the certain destruction of the Leaning Tower. Sergeant Weckstein was a soldier tasked with doing his duty in a brutal war. He moved into position under fire to get a clear view of the tower. He watched it. He observed the area around its base. He saw German soldiers. He saw them moving in and out of buildings near the tower. But what he did not see, what he could not confirm with certainty, was German activity inside the tower itself. This was his moment of decision. The orders were to call in fire if he confirmed enemy presence. He had seen Germans in the vicinity. It would have been easy and understandable to make the call. But something stopped him. He later spoke about it, saying he was fascinated by the beauty of the tower. He understood its immense historical and artistic value. He recognized that it was more than just a military objective, it was a global treasure. So, Sergeant Weckstein made a decision that went against the immediate military imperative. He decided not to call in the artillery strike. He reported that he could not definitively confirm German observation posts within the tower. His decision, made under intense pressure and in the heat of battle, saved the Leaning Tower of Pisa. He chose to spare a piece of history, an act of remarkable foresight and humanity in a conflict known for its indiscriminate destruction. This is the real dramatic story of the tower's survival. It wasn't a matter of a stray cannonball, but of a direct threat that was averted by a single person's choice. Without Sergeant Weckstein's decision, the Leaning Tower might not stand today. It would have been reduced to rubble, another casualty of war. His act, quiet and unheralded at the time, stands as a testament to the idea that, even in the darkest moments, humanity and respect for culture can prevail. The tower survived the war, not because it was magically untouched, but because a soldier chose to protect it. Aftermath and legacy a survivor stands tall. The war eventually ended. The fighting in Italy was long and bitter, but by spring of 1945, the country was liberated. Pisa, like many Italian cities, bore the scars of conflict. Buildings were damaged or destroyed, infrastructure was ruined, and the lives of its people were deeply affected. But amidst the rubble and the rebuilding, one iconic structure stood tall, still leaning, remarkably intact, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Its survival was a testament to luck, certainly, but more importantly, to the conscious decision of Sergeant Leon Weckstein. Had he given the order, the tower would have been gone. Instead, it stood as a symbol of resilience, an ancient monument that had weathered yet another storm of human conflict. After the war, the world turned its attention to rebuilding and recovering. For the Leaning Tower, its long-standing problem of the lean continued to be a concern. Over the centuries, it had continued to tilt more and more, and by the late 20th century, experts worried it might finally topple. This led to decades of efforts to stabilize it. Engineers, architects, and preservationists worked tirelessly. They studied the soil, designed complex counterweights, and removed earth from the higher side of the foundations to subtly reduce the lean. The tower was closed to the public for over a decade, from 1990 to 2001, while these massive stabilization efforts took place. It was a huge, delicate undertaking. Imagine trying to fix a building that's already leaning dangerously without letting it fall over. It was a race against time and gravity, but they succeeded. The tower was stabilized, its lean reduced slightly, ensuring it would stand for at least another 200 years, according to the experts. Today, the Leaning Tower of Pisa is still one of the most recognized landmarks in the world. Millions of tourists visit it every year, marveling at its unique tilt, taking those classic photos, pretending to hold it up. It has returned to its role as a peaceful cultural icon, drawing people from every corner of the globe. The story of the Nazi cannonball, while a compelling myth, fades in comparison to the true history of the tower during World War II. The real story is not about a static piece of metal, but about human choices in wartime. It's about the very real threat of destruction it faced and how a single soldier's decision saved it. This truth adds a deeper layer of meaning to the tower's already rich history. It reminds us that even in the chaos of war, there are moments of conscience, moments when the value of heritage can transcend military necessity. The Leaning Tower of Pisa stands not just as a beautiful architectural wonder, but also as a quiet monument to those decisions, a survivor of an age of conflict, ready to greet future generations with its enduring, improbable lean.